3 days after closing on their new home, a 6-bedroom Dutch colonial at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, Derek and Maria Broaddus received a letter. It was addressed to the new owner. It was handwritten. It opened with a brief history of the house. Then it got uncomfortably specific. The letter stated that the writer had been put in charge of watching the house for decades. The worst kind of binge watching, it seems. It referenced the Broaddus' 3 children, not by name, but by age. It asked, "Have they found what is in the walls yet?" It described the house as having young blood now. More letters followed. They tried to sell the house. They couldn't. The writer of the letter was never identified. It was signed, The Watcher. No proper name, no return address. Westfield, New Jersey is the kind of suburb that exists specifically to be unremarkable in a comfortable way. 25 miles west of Manhattan. Median household income hovers around $200,000. The downtown has a Trader Joe's and several restaurants that describe themselves as farm to table. The public schools are consistently ranked among the best in the state. Westfield is a town built on proximity. The lots are generous, but not vast. The houses sit close enough that you can hear a neighbor's lawnmower from your kitchen, close enough that you learn the rhythm of someone else's weekday mornings without trying. People wave. People notice when the recycling bins stay out past Tuesday. The neighborhood's next door accounts are active and likely filled with the content your parents' Facebook won't host. 657 Boulevard is a 1905 Dutch colonial revival. Nearly 4,000 square feet, wraparound porch, set back from the road on a quiet residential street. The kind of house that appears in real estate listings with the phrase "move-in ready" and photographs that emphasize natural light. The kind of curb appeal you'd see a retired balloon artist and an amateur taxidermist couple spend way too much money for on a home and gardening show marathon. Boulevard is a street where people walk their dogs at predictable hours and know which families have children. A new family moving in is observed, warmly, ordinarily, in the way that neighbors observe things. Someone might note the moving truck. Someone might bring over a casserole. Someone might count the kids. The Watcher's letters didn't contain information that was, strictly speaking, difficult to obtain. They contained information any attentive neighbor already had. The Broadduses purchased the house in June 2014 from John and Andrea Woods, who had owned it for over 2 decades. The Woods had received a letter from The Watcher just before closing. According to the Broadduses' account, the Woods didn't disclose this before closing. The Woods later said they hadn't considered it worth mentioning. The Broadduses had spent years looking for the right house in Westfield. Derek was in insurance. Maria was at home with the kids. This was the house. They never moved in. The first letter arrived in early June 2014. It was mailed to the house, not to a forwarding address. The writer knew the sale had closed. Perhaps they also watched the Zillow listing. The first letter positioned the writer as a generational custodian of the house, someone who had been watching it for decades, who knew its rooms, who knew the previous owners, and who already knew about the children. The language of the letters is worth sitting with. "Bring me young blood" isn't a phrase that appears in any standard threat assessment framework. It's theatrical. It borrows from Gothic fiction and horror films and something older and less specific than either. The phrase, "what is in the walls," is similarly calibrated, concrete enough to be frightening, vague enough to be unanswerable. You can't check whether there's something in the walls of a 109-year-old house and come away reassured. There's always something in the walls. Pipes, wiring, Grandpa's lockbox from the war, and a refusal to explain why your aunt looks nothing like the rest of the family. The Watcher didn't need to hide anything in the house. The question alone was the weapon. The second letter arrived within weeks. It was more specific. It described the Broaddus' movements, when they visited the house, what they were doing there, which rooms they entered. It stated, "I see you putting up curtains. I watch you from the house across the way." It asked again about the children. The third letter went further. It described the interior renovations the Broadduses had begun. It referenced workers who had been at the house, and it contained a passage that the Broadduses later described as the point at which they stopped going to the property entirely. A reference to the children playing outside that made clear the writer had been observing them. The emotional math of the situation is straightforward and brutal. The Broadduses had a mortgage payment on a house they couldn't occupy. They had kids who'd been told they were getting a new home in a big yard, and who were then told they weren't for reasons no parent wants to explain to a child under 10. They were paying for lawn maintenance and utilities on a property that existed for them only as a source of anxiety and financial loss. Derek Broaddus reportedly lost weight and had difficulty sleeping. Maria Broaddus described the experience as consuming their family. They owned a house that someone else had claimed, not through deed or title, but through the simple assertion that they were watching. The Broadduses contacted the Westfield Police Department. They investigated. The letters were analyzed for fingerprints and DNA. Nothing usable was recovered. Handwriting analysis was conducted. Neighbors were interviewed. The Broadduses also pursued the matter in civil court. They filed a lawsuit against John and Andrea Woods, the previous owners, alleging the Woods had known about the letters and failed to disclose them before the sale. The case was dismissed. The court found that the Broadduses hadn't sufficiently demonstrated that the Woods' knowledge of the letter rose to the level of a material omission under New Jersey law. The letter from a self-described generational stalker who referenced their children, in other words, didn't quite clear the bar. The police installed surveillance cameras. No further letters arrived while the cameras were active. When the cameras were removed, the letters came back. The watcher, it turns out, also watched for cameras. The Broadduses attempted to sell the house. New Jersey law requires sellers to disclose material facts about a property that could affect its value. Letters from a self-described stalker who references your children by age and claims the house needs young blood qualify. Every prospective buyer was told about the letters. Every prospective buyer walked away. They attempted to subdivide the lot and build new homes on the property, reasoning that demolishing the house might end the letters and recoup the investment. The Westfield Planning Board denied the application after neighbors objected. Some of those neighbors, the Broadduses noted, had been among the individuals investigated as possible suspects. Goes to show you HOAs and NIMBYism are the real villains of most stories. The family rented the house out. A fourth letter arrived while the tenants were living there. It was addressed to the Broadduses. In 2019, the situation shifted. Investigators reportedly looked into a former neighbor, Michael Langford, whose family had lived next door to 657 Boulevard for decades, as a suspect. Langford's family home sat immediately adjacent to the property. According to reporting at the time, his access to neighborhood information, his proximity, and certain circumstantial details were said to align with the letter's contents. No charges were filed. Langford denied involvement. The Broadduses sold the house in 2019 for approximately $959,000, a loss of nearly $400,000 from their purchase price, plus years of mortgage payments, legal fees, and renovation costs on a home they never lived in. The rational explanation is straightforward. Someone who lived near 657 Boulevard, likely someone who had lived there for a long time, wrote the letters. The writer had visual access to the property, knowledge of the neighborhood's history, and an awareness of the real estate transaction. The references to what is in the walls could have been theatrical embellishment. The persona of the watcher could have been the invention of someone territorial, someone mentally unwell, or someone with a grudge against the Broadduses or the previous owners. This explanation is almost certainly correct. The letters were written by a person, placed in the mailbox, and motivated by human psychology. There is nothing in them that requires a supernatural mechanism. New Jersey seller disclosure law requires that property owners reveal known material defects and conditions that could affect a buyer's decision. It was designed for things like foundation cracks and mold, tangible problems with tangible remedies. A letter from someone calling themselves the Watcher fits awkwardly into this framework. It isn't a defect in the property. It's a defect in the situation surrounding the property. The law, it turned out, was better equipped to handle a leaking roof than a stalker with stationery. What makes the case interesting, and what made it a Netflix series, a best-selling investigation, and a national news story, is the totality of the failure. Every institution involved performed its function. None of them produced a result. The letters were mailed through the United States Postal Service. Mail tampering is a federal crime. The Westfield Police Department and the Union County Prosecutor's Office investigated. The Broaddus hired former FBI agents as private consultants. Handwriting analysis was conducted. DNA was tested. A suspect was eventually identified. And nothing happened. No arrest, no charges, no resolution. Someone wrote to a family about their children, called themselves the Watcher, referenced young blood, described their movements inside their own home, and did this repeatedly over years. The entire apparatus of local, county, and federal law enforcement was unable or unwilling to produce a prosecution. Stalking by mail is a crime in New Jersey. The relevant statute requires a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety. The Watcher's letters were frightening, specific, and repeated. They also never contained a direct threat, no promise of violence, no explicit statement of intent to harm. The letters occupied a space that prosecutors reportedly found difficult to act on, menacing enough to upend a family's life, carefully worded enough to remain just inside the boundary of what the law could tolerate. Whether that calibration was deliberate or incidental is, like most things in this case, unknown. The paranormal reading of the case is thin, but persistent. Some accounts frame the house itself as the source, a property with a history of strange events predating the Broaddus's. The "what is in the walls" line has generated particular speculation, though no one has found anything in the walls. The idea of a generational watcher, someone, or something, assigned to observe the house across decades, slides easily from true crime territory into folk horror. The case became, in the years after, a kind of shorthand, a symbol of something people had suspected but couldn't quite articulate, that the suburb, the safest feeling place in the American landscape, operates on the assumption that nothing like this happens there. And when it does, the tools designed to address it don't work, because they were built for a world where threats are direct and identifiable and prosecutable. The Watcher wasn't direct, wasn't identifiable, wasn't, in the end, prosecutable. The suburb's bargain, trade proximity and predictability for safety, turned out to have a clause nobody read. The real horror, though, is more bureaucratic, as it usually is. Someone watched a family, told them they were being watched, described their children, and faced no consequences of any kind. In 2022, Netflix released The Watcher, a 7-episode series created by Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan. It starred Bobby Cannavale and Naomi Watts as fictionalized versions of the Broadduses. The series invented subplots, added characters, and proposed multiple possible solutions to the mystery, none of which corresponded to the actual investigation. It got the anxiety right. It got the house approximately right. It got the institutional helplessness roughly right. It got everything else wrong on purpose, which is what dramatizations do. The show was watched by tens of millions of people, many of whom came away believing they understood the case. They did not. .657 Boulevard still stands. It was sold. Again. The new owners, as far as public records indicate, haven't reported receiving letters. The Broadduses lost the house, the money, and several years. They gained a Netflix series, which is a particular kind of compensation. The Broadduses, by their own account, spent 5 years in a kind of limbo, owning a home they were afraid to enter, unable to sell it, unable to demolish it, unable to get the legal system to resolve the underlying problem. They eventually moved on. People do. The question the case leaves behind isn't really about who wrote the letters. It's about what you do when the answer is, nobody knows, and nobody's going to find out. And the system worked exactly as it was supposed to. The watcher was never identified, never charged, never caught. The letters stopped, or at least no new letters have been made public. This one hasn't been solved. The letter writer is still out there. Thank you all for watching.